Become an immortal and save Persia. That's the premise of Ubisoft's new Metroidvania game. I've gone hands-on, defeated the final boss, and now I'm here to share my thoughts. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and this is our review of Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. A big thank you to Ubisoft for sending us a review code for Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. It's been well over a decade, almost two, since we had a proper new installment in the Prince of Persia series. The games are, for the most part, beloved, dating all the way back to the first game released in 1989. That's why when The Lost Crown popped up on my radar, I was instantly intrigued. I have fond memories of playing The Sands of Time and Warrior Within, but as I said just seconds ago, it's been well over a decade, 2 decades in fact, so the thought of jumping into a new Prince of Persia game, well, that's exactly what it was, a brand new experience. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is a fascinating side-scroller. It's a Metroidvania through and through. Think Hollow Knight or Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and you'll be right on the money. By all accounts, that formula works perfectly for this game. I had an absolute blast exploring the various biomes, learning the nuances that came with each area, all while exploring and trying to piece together the story that was unfolding around me. Now, full transparency, I am an absolute sucker for games like this. Both those games I mentioned before, Hollow Knight and Ori and the Will of the Wisps, are 2 of my all-time favorite games, full stop. And when you consider that Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is being developed by the same Ubisoft team that created Rayman Legends and Rayman Origins, 2 games that are absolutely adored across the gaming universe, and yes, The Lost Crown was destined for great things. In all seriousness, don't just take my word at face value. The Lost Crown has a ton going for it, and over the next few minutes, I'm going to break down why this game is absolutely worth your time. So right out of the gate, the first thing about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown that blew me away was the exploration. In a good Metroidvania game, exploration is at the very heart of the experience, and without an interesting world to explore, all the other supporting systems don't really matter. I do want to point out that the game does feature a guided and unguided mode, which does give players an option for a slightly more informed playthrough. While playing guided, the world map will have indicators as to where the next main quest objective is, as well as small markings that show you the direction of shortcuts. The mode you choose is going to be solely based on your preferred playstyle, and honestly, it's great to have both options. Now, in terms of the exploration itself, there are a few pieces I want to break down. First is the look and design of each biome. Again, Rayman team here, they absolutely crushed it. The more you explore Mount Kaf, the more you realize just how massive the game world really is. One standout moment was closer towards the end of the game. Time works differently in Mount Kaf, and one biome, the Raging Sea, starts frozen in time. You're quite literally running across the quote-unquote frozen ocean, all on the backdrop of a fierce battle, again, frozen in time. It's enchanting, and each biome brings a different level of charm to that exploration. Add on to that one of the defining features of the game, the platforming, and already you've got yourself a recipe for success. When I say this game features some of the most intense platforming you can imagine, I seriously mean it. And the thing is, it doesn't exactly get easier or harder based on the difficulty. It's just wickedly tuned. Once you've unlocked a few core abilities, you really have to push yourself to use them in the right sequence with almost flawless timing. Sure, there are some basic elements that allow you to get from point A to point B, but there are some sections of the game where I truly had to stop and map out every single move because the tuning was that intense. I definitely don't say this to scare anyone. I had an absolute blast pushing myself to the limit as far as my platforming skills are concerned, but it's definitely a challenge. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown from a platforming perspective stands right up there shoulder to shoulder with games like Super Meat Boy and Celeste. The third thing about the exploration that won me over was the diversity of ideas and the constant itch to actually explore. The game world is massive, and while I haven't done a direct map comparison to other games in the genre, I can say with full confidence that the world is huge. Each section feels completely different, with unique challenges and a metric ton of things to find. We're not just talking about false walls either, that's a given, but secrets that lead to platforming, that leads to puzzles, and on the rabbit hole goes. I should stop and mention the puzzles for a second, because truly they are fantastic. They are all mind benders, and just like the platforming, they pushed me to think, and I mean really think about the solution. You know how some games claim they have puzzles, but then in practice, it's something like picking up an orb and putting it on a pedestal? The Lost Crown doesn't have any of that, and most of the puzzles combine elements of both problem solving and platforming. Much like the platforming, this might not be your thing, especially if you're used to hand-holding. But for me, I found it refreshing to actually have to solve puzzles without the game pointing me in the right direction. The pieces are all there, and if you're someone that loves massively diverse, sprawling worlds with tons of secrets, platforming sections, and puzzles galore, then the Lost Crown will be right up your alley. But exploration is only one facet of the game's experience, and to truly understand Prince of Persia, we have to look at the complete picture. I was genuinely shocked how much I was invested in the story of the Lost Crown. It's not an overly complicated one, and that's saying something given all the wonkiness with time and space you end up diving into, but really at the root of it all was a cast of memorable characters. You play as Sargon, one of the immortals that is duty-bound to protect Persia. You come to know the other immortals rather quickly, and it's clear that although Sargon is the youngest of the immortals, he has the most talent. It's a subtle dynamic that plays out throughout the entire game as you run into the immortals on your journey throughout Mount Kaf. Once the adventure really sets off and you're exploring the mountain solo, that's when the story becomes more about Sargon's evolution as a character and a person more than really anything else. No, he's not the Prince of Persia, and that's not really spoiling anything as you meet the prince shortly after the tutorial, but quite honestly, I really enjoyed Sargon as a character. Gifted with almost godlike powers, the team could have easily gone off the rails with this character, but I found his portrayal, writing, and really everything measured throughout the entire game. Even the final beats of the story, when Sargon's powers are at their greatest, didn't feel forced or heavy-handed. It's such an interesting dynamic because, as we'll talk about in just a bit when diving into the combat, the game almost presents itself like an anime during some of the most high-profile action moments. There's so much character development in those short, overly animated sections of the action, but it all goes back to what I said about every character being memorable. That's honestly what I've realized about characters in video games over the last couple of years. Being memorable trumps almost everything else, and while there are a few factors that go into that, good writing, design, solid voice acting, etc., I think The Lost Crown does a great job making each supporting character look and feel important to the world. Obviously, the Immortals are a huge part of that equation, but there are also a number of other characters that help shape the world. Most of your adventure is done in isolation, which is why when you run across a character like Farava, you can't help but be drawn into their warmth and charm. Not only that, but these characters are often invaluable to your progression in the game. Most of the characters feed into the bigger story in some way, and it's so hard to really dive into that without spoiling anything, mainly because the story is set up from the very beginning. Prince Hassan is kidnapped and the Immortals are tasked with getting him back. A story of heroism and bravery quickly take a turn, and what you thought was a simple rescue operation becomes so much more than that. Layer on top of that the elements of mysticism and time manipulation that are synonymous with Prince of Persia games, and it's an engaging story, one that gets more fantastical the deeper into the game you get. Throughout all of that though, I never felt like the game lost its footing. As I said before, The Lost Crown is as much about Sargon's growth as it is about finding Prince Hassan, and you experience that throughout the entire game. Small cutscenes at the end of boss battles offer the biggest glimpse into his journey and what's coming next, but there are also small expositions where you get to experience him grappling with his role as an immortal and what it really means to be a Persian hero. All in all, I'd say the team strikes the perfect balance of action and storytelling, and at no point did I become unengaged with the story The Lost Crown was telling. I don't know if you'd consider it a narrative marvel, but it certainly kept me hooked for the long haul. I'd be remiss if I didn't spend the final section of this video talking about the action, because it is a big part of the Prince of Persia formula. First things first, the question that is always first out of the gate when talking about a side-scroller. It is snappy and wickedly responsive. At no point did I ever feel like the game itself was holding me back. As I mentioned before, there is no shortage of challenging platforming sections, and if I messed up, which I did plenty of, it was always because of me, not because Sargon failed to react to a button input. That's hugely important in this type of game, but again, I point to the experience of the Ubisoft Montpellier team in this space. To be frank, I felt like the combat was a second act to the platforming and puzzle solving, at least when exploring the majority of Mount Koth. For the most part, the goal is to learn about your surroundings and find your path forward, and while enemies are certainly blocking your path, they're rarely the primary obstacle. That being said, there are a few occasions where you're locked into some sort of gauntlet, and the action is 100% the main focus of the various boss battles, but that's a fraction of the experience. Things start off relatively simple. Sargon is equipped with dual swords, and those are the weapons he carries with him throughout the entire game. Eventually, he'll gain access to things like a bow, and even later on a royal sash that acts as a grappling hook, but all those additional tools are built on a foundation of the game's combat. What really stood out to me was some of the ways Sargon can chain attacks together to give the action a fluidity you don't often find in these types of side-scrollers. It's not just smashing basic attacks and then jumping to dodge, you actually string together moves including parries and neutral dodges to great effect if you have the skills. I definitely leaned more into the offensive playstyle, but that's because I am the worst when it comes to parrying attacks. The game gives you enough tools to approach it really however you want, and after playing on various difficulties, I will say the game is substantially more challenging the more you crank up the meter. When slicing and stabbing just won't cut it, Sargon can tap into special abilities known as Athra Surges, and these are truly game-changing. You unlock a variety of them by playing and exploring the game world, and they're not all tied to the main quest, so you really need to explore if you want to find them all. These are, for the most part, one-shot abilities that absolutely devastate lesser enemies and can turn the tide in a boss fight. By attacking and parrying incoming blows, your Athra meter fills up. You can slot 2 different Athra abilities at any one time, and so long as you have the power, you can unleash them as you see fit. That's where I was first introduced to the anime-style combat that truly took me by surprise. This is something you see a lot of, specifically in the boss battles, and while we won't share much of those with you for fear of spoiling something that's worth experiencing yourself, I will just say it's an element of the game's combat I was not expecting, and it's awesome. The game also features a system called Vengeful Strikes, which are essentially perfect parries that lead to an oh-so-satisfying one-shot kill. While I wouldn't say the combat is the star of the game, when it gets its moment to shine, it certainly does so with flair. Where that dynamic flips and combat does become the centerpiece of the action is during major boss battles, which are truly epic. Again, think about your favorite Metroidvania, and in this realm, the Lost Crown could stand shoulder to shoulder with any of them. Now again, in the spirit of not spoiling anything, we will show you a bit of the first boss battle against a deadly chimera, but understand things just get more intense from here. What I really love, and I mentioned this before, are the cutscenes that happen at the start, middle, and end of each battle. Almost always, they're signifying a new phase of the encounter, but to animate a full cutscene, often with some intense animation, was truly epic. By the end of the game, I was tapping into Sargon's entire bag of tricks to overcome the elite enemies I was fighting. And while the best Metroidvania games do this, my skills were truly put to the test as I had to learn the intricate moves of each boss, and then think through how each ability that I had access to would help me overcome that challenge. Throughout all of this, the game's progression system does little in the way of making you overpowered. There is a central hub called the Haven where you can buy additional healing potions and a few amulets, and even the blacksmith goddess Kahiva's upgrades only help you get to par with the myriad of challenges that you face. I also found that amulets weren't something I really messed around with either. I found what worked for me early on in the game, and I pretty much stuck with that throughout my entire experience. I imagine there are a ton more to find, but I never felt compelled to really hunt them down, as I was more interested in pushing through the main story. Kahiva's upgrades were essential though, and something as simple as increasing the damage of your swords was noticeable. She offers a lot more, such as the expansion of your quiver so you can use more arrows before restocking, as well as amulet upgrades which increase their power and efficiency, and I dabbled in that a bit, but eventually you just run out of purchasing resources. At that point, the onus is on you to either continue exploring or push deeper into the main story. You could, and I really do want to stress this, you could focus on side content, absolutely. It's just not something I chose to do this time around. Once you beat the game, there's not much reason to continue playing, but you can re-enter the world and continue chipping away at the side content post-credits. In retrospect, it probably would have made sense for me to explore some more side content along the way, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to how you like to tackle these types of games. Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is an absolutely fantastic game, another in a long line of well-executed titles from a studio that understands this genre so well. The ability to blend old ideas with new, introduce and make us care about memorable characters, and create a gameplay loop that balances action and problem solving are all reasons why I loved every second of my time with this game. At the time of making this video, I put in close to 13 hours of work on the game, and that's primarily focused on the main story up and through the game's ending. As you can see, I've only completed 58% of what it has to offer, so clearly there's some more side content to explore. This is just the opinion of one random guy on the internet, but if you're looking to start off 2024 with a solid game that'll give you hours of entertainment and offer something truly different in the current landscape of games, then consider checking out Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.